While Overwatch 2's rivals have been dropping the bag, the devs assigned to the new standalone game mode for Overwatch 2, Stadium, have been cooking. Overwatch is like that nerdy girl in the movie who takes off her glasses to reveal she was the one meant for us all along. And we just had to look past her flaws to realize and appreciate how beautiful she really is. And maybe we needed to grow and develop to deserve her. Huh? The developers of Stadium did an Ask Me Anything on Reddit, going deep on their design philosophy as well as giving us key news such as when to expect new heroes and much, much more. I'm going to summarize the key takeaways from the AMA, as these often can get really wordy as the devs wax poetical. Starting off with the first comment, how does the mostly positive feedback feel after working so hard to claw back fan trust? And you kids today, you don't know how good you got it. Old Blizzard never would have even responded to a question like this. Back in my day, Jeff Kaplan would slap me upside the head if I tried to talk to him like this, and I did. Still discussing it with my therapist. Okay, Dylan, the senior game designer, responds, saying it's been absolutely incredible and surreal. He details as you work on something for so long, you can only see the flaws in it, especially as they seem to wait until the last minute to announce that they even had this coming, which is probably the smart move. He calls it extremely energizing and an important reminder that, hey, most importantly, the team made something fun. We're beyond thrilled to have it hit a point where we now get to collaborate with all of you to grow Stadium into something even greater. And as a personal note, it certainly feels like Stadium's design was distinctly looking to solve several problems that were announced about at the start of Overwatch 2. So at the very least, several years in development, particularly when you think about the big moments that hero shooter fans look for, as well as the agency to express your playstyle with your hero, as opposed to feeling you have to play a counter pick game, which is something they'll detail later in the AMA as well. This next question is about bad tank matchups, which I actually think at first glance seem to be way worse than they are in normal 5v5, as in they reference D.Va into Zarya. In the main game 5v5, the D.Va player probably can go deep into the backline, only play the high ground, dodge the Zarya most of the time. But Stadium is a brawly game mode. So while you can try to do that, the maps are so small and the engagement distances don't really warrant that. Which is why, of course, in a recent patch, they buffed up the anti-beam item for D.Va, just as an example. So they're trying to make it so that the builds counteract that. However, I still think it's a problem that they either need to address with the item system or the format. Here he says that they won't do hero bans to begin because the Stadium roster is kind of limited right now, but they do add that a hero draft could be interesting, and they say it's certainly something they're interested to explore. I mean, straight up, Stadium is a MOBA game, right? We've seen draft modes in MOBA games. I've been saying I want a draft mode since Overwatch 1. Hero bans was just a start to what I ultimately wanted. While a draft mode certainly adds more time to the match, Stadium matches already can last a long time. But it's to the case now where I feel like the worst matches I have, I just want to exit as fast as I can. And sometimes I'm upset when the mercy rule doesn't kick in. Even without bans, an exclusive picking draft for Stadium would be very beneficial, I think. Now, the Stadium devs implement the main designs from the main game and transfer them into Stadium, expanding out their powers and items and things like that. They get asked about the fast track of a new hero such as Freya going from the main game into Stadium, and they explain how they design it. We start with a set of archetypes that hit on different fantasies or focus on a different part of the hero's kit. Usually we want one core fantasy plus a build that typically empowers the core gameplay loop of that hero. Then the other archetypes typically introduce new gameplay patterns or more transformative effects. After we have a set of archetypes, we usually want 2 to 3 core powers to support each of those archetypes, and then the rest are filled out with more flexible powers that are applicable to a number of archetypes. We did turn an early prototype of Freya's ultimate into a power. I believe the current thinking is to prioritize getting new heroes into Stadium the mid-season after they're released. And especially since they're talking about designing it this way, I really feel they might benefit from organizing the powers slightly differently than they have them displayed right now. Because while yes, they have the example builds or starter builds tab, I think in reality, I strongly feel that there's only a few truly viable builds for any different character, typically requiring you to get the key or anchor power early. And they're kind of saying that they do design that, right? There's typically a slew of powers that amplify what you would be doing anyway, and a few that transform you to give you an extra arm or emphasis to your playstyle. Those are the ones you typically should build around first, because if you don't, you're like lacking depth in your play. I think they could make that a bit more user-friendly. However, the downside maybe would be to rob some of the creativity out of that by forcing you down a lane, but pros and cons to each. The devs get asked about the problem of counter picking in Stadium, especially since you can't swap, so you're stuck in a counter pick matchup the entire match. And then further, how are they going to go about going to add characters like Pharah or Wrecking Ball, who typically are very counter pick in the main game? The devs say, in Stadium, we are always striving for players to feel like they have the tools to pick from and adapt to their opponents. We have tried to create hero items that help soften some of the worst matchups. We also try to create answers in the general items. For example, if you're struggling with beam heroes, we've got a lot of ways to get armor to reduce a significant amount of that damage. Additionally, we try to create builds and powers that are stronger in certain hero matchups. Ultimately, we are trying to create an experience where you can feel you can play the hero you chose in any matchup, even if you're at a slight disadvantage. We know that we're not perfectly hit that mark just yet. We will continue to try to add the answers every hero needs. As we continue to add more heroes in Stadium, we will also update previous heroes to make sure they have the tools needed to combat the newly added heroes. In my opinion, some heroes are better off at this than others. Oddly enough, the more basic your hero is, it seems, the more flexible they are in Stadium, because the more heavy lifting the items seem to be doing. Like Reinhardt is incredibly reliable in Stadium. If they add Wrecking Ball tomorrow, well, he's already got a knockback resist item. The devs go on this point, expanding on Connor's answer. One of the core goals of Stadium design is that we empower you to replace counter swapping with counter building. An example of that kind of upgrade we've made is Genji's anti-beam coating, which you can buy in those Zarya, Mei, Moira games that ordinarily make you feel like you have to swap off. To your point though, we have our work cut out for us with Pharah and Brawl, which is why we decided not to include them at the launch of the roster. Can't speak to any specifics yet, but we're currently talking about ways we can address the matchups too and make them fun. They get asked about maps being added, and they essentially say that you can expect a diverse set of maps, especially older ones. Like there's an alternate version of Paris that is actually playable as opposed to the original version. He says they found it's a great opportunity to take a fresh approach to locations from Overwatch's history, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see us do more of that in the future. They get asked a series of questions about the matchmaking and ranked. Keep in mind that Stadium is like a super casual ranked mode, is less of a skill rating and more of a cosmetic, goal-oriented progression system. So here they clear up some important questions that we might have about it. Is there an internal MMR that is not bound to visual rank? Yes, we use an internal MMR for matchmaking that is independent of a player's visual rank. However, we apply various bonuses, such as calibration and win streak bonuses, to help better align a player's visual rank with their internal MMR. The internal MMR is a full blank slate, with logic similar to that of competitive matches. Will there be a soft or hard ranked reset every season in Stadium? Currently, we plan to perform a soft reset of MMR at the start of each Stadium season. Is the matchmaking currently more similar to quick play in terms of allowed MMR ranges in a match, even without considering the lack of grouping restrictions? They say Stadium matchmaking is more similar to competitive matchmaking than to quick play. They expand on talking about the ranked mode. They think the biggest success it's had is how accessible it is. He said, we wanted the funnel to be open and wide as possible to give everyone the chance to jump in and have fun right away. For matchmaking in particular, we're always looking for ways to improve on the experience because Stadium is a brand new mode. The matchmaker hasn't had much of an opportunity to put players where they need to be yet. That being said, things will absolutely smooth out over time as people play more matches and settle into their ranks. They get asked about new heroes being added to Stadium. The current plan is to add new heroes to Stadium the mid-season after they release. For existing heroes, there are many factors that determine which heroes enter the Stadium. While hero popularity is one, gameplay is generally considered first. Kind of like how D.Va was introduced into Overwatch at the same time Mei was. It's important to maintain healthy game balance when introducing new choices. We hope to get to everyone eventually, but the live game isn't always the best measurement of who should be next, because Stadium's gameplay balance is very different from other live modes. They get asked which heroes are the most popular in Stadium right now. Now keep in mind, this is just pick rates. They were asked what's the popular pick, not necessarily what's the biggest win rate. So here, Soldier is far ahead of the rest. However, the rest of the cast are fairly close together. Support, Juno is the most picked. The rest are within 15% of her pick rate, except for Lucio, who is last by a fair margin. He's very good though. For tank, it's Reinhardt, just like Soldier, way ahead of the rest, but the rest of the tanks are fairly grouped in pick rate. Freya will be the next hero added to Stadium sometime in the mid-season, and the devs say that there will be a power that lets Freya shoot a powered down version of her ultimate much more frequently, which is the most common power that they use across the entire cast. A mini version of the ult. Kind of a great idea, frankly. Super fun design. And in general, the current plan is to add new heroes the mid-season after they release. Now keep in mind, of course, Overwatch adds heroes more slowly than competitor games. And I do believe the devs have said on live streams that we should expect new heroes every season. So that means even when a brand new hero isn't introduced to the main game, that means an older hero will be reintroduced into Stadium. They get asked about new game modes added to Stadium. The devs say, one thing I love personally about Stadium is the shorter round-based format. We love the change of pace that Stadium brings to the table, and we are excited about the possibilities. And they mentioned that they have Payload Race, a new super fun exclusive to Stadium mode that didn't make it for launch. So that's going to be released sometime in the future. Of course, that was a mode in Team Fortress 2, but usually deemed a bit casual. I'm not so sure how I feel about it being added. I think they might need enough maps for it to come up often enough, because otherwise it'll really play different than any of the other modes. Because it'll be the first multi-objective mode in any of the Overwatch modes, really. Because if I'm not mistaken, or at least how I anticipate it to be translated to Overwatch, it means you can attack and defend at the same time. And the dynamics of where you should emphasize your attention changes pretty dramatically. And in general in Overwatch, they've really liked the single objective archetype, as it makes those decisions very straightforward. Payload Race will feel like you're playing two modes at once. They get asked on the player numbers of Stadium and their goals on adding heroes and if there will ever be a rotating roster. They say, we can't give many details yet, but we are very happy with how Stadium is currently performing. I don't know what that means. I'm sure if the numbers are great, it'll be mentioned in a dev update. But like, what are they gonna say? Oh, our new mode that we hired an entire dev team to make for years is a failure. I mean, well, they're not gonna say that. He goes on to say, and I actually kind of like the wording here, very political. We also do currently plan on getting the entire hero roster in Stadium eventually. There are no plans for a rotating hero selection currently. It says currently twice, because of course all their devs are beaten over the head to never commit to anything. Can't let down expectations if you never set them. They get asked about the design of some powers and abilities. Mei gets a transformative one where it turns her into a snowball, whereas Cassidy kind of just gets options to make his damage and cooldowns better. The devs say that's a great question and maybe something to keep in mind for in the future, though I keep suggesting that Cassidy should be able to turn into a giant tumbleweed and mosey around, but Dylan said no. They get asked about third person, and he does say that they've talked about it a bit in interviews, but Overwatch has always had third person elements as part of its gameplay since it's launched. Abilities like Reinhardt or Briggs Shield, Junkrat's Tire, etc., where it made sense and players would benefit from the additional environmental context they use third person in those cases. As so much of Stadium is focused on expanding and pushing hero fantasy, often by making hero abilities more explosive or impactful, we found that having a third-person option on all the time would be the best method to give players that extra peripheral information to cover these new sources of visual noise. I actually have found that full third-person mode hasn't impacted our balancing philosophy too much, though there are, of course, growing pains associated with any move like this. That said, I personally enjoy using third-person almost exclusively, as I find it really helps sell the feel we're going for with Stadium. They talk about the complexities of balancing Stadium. He gets really nerdy in his reply, and I'm not going to read it all. But generally says they have 3 to 4 as many ways to look at balance for Stadium than the baseline competitive game, because of course there's items and scaling and economy, bounties, powers, items. In any case, it has a different rank system altogether, so it's just a different game, a lot more knobs to tune. But he does say that the trickiest problem of all is what to do with combinations of powers and items or builds, because there's an incredible amount of combinations available in Stadium, but only a few of them might be, quote, required to compromise what we as players would define as a build. I'll translate this to be like, well, there's a lot of bad options, and what do you do about the good options? A hero's performance is going to go widely up and down compared to their good options to their bad options. But he goes on to say, at best, we can make an educated guess about what a build might be before trying to roll up millions of matches worth of data to analyze its performance. But that approach is far too manual, dependent on individual subjectivity, and doesn't scale when we need to rapidly make changes to Stadium to address balance concerns. We needed a way to automate asking the right questions. What builds exist for this hero before performing analysis? Is this build performing well? We do so by pre-treating the data with cluster analyses on the hero and their power item build combinations, which label the player and matches with labels like build 1 or build 2, such that they can be categorized, defined, and aggregated later. We then use various methods, power occurrence, item occurrence, ability keyword occurrence, to describe the build so that they can say things like Junker Queen build 1 is a Carnage Rampage build that tends to use the Thirsty for Blood item, and be able to say that Junker Queen build 1 is whatever win rate or usage rate. This gives us deeper insights into whether an individual power or item is overpowered, or if the combination of several powers or items, not individual, is what could be targeted for nerfs or buffs. The devs get asked if there's any plans to add ways to generate money from mitigating damage. On tank, it feels really incentivized to play aggressively and not supportive with shielding upgrades, as you often end up behind the enemy tank, which leads to unfun and one-sided games. The devs answer, we do not have any plans to grant Stadium cash from mitigating damage. Currently, our Stadium cash generation from damage and healing matches closely to how Ultimate Charge or perk experience gain works. Part of the reason for this is that some heroes can mitigate infinite amounts of damage. Looking at you, Diva. Mitigating damage also prevents your opponents from generating Stadium cash, just like it does to Ultimate Charge. So there are some important currency impacts that occur from damage mitigation. We've attempted to give every hero a tankier/utility focused build path that players can pivot into when they're falling behind. This is paired with our survival items generally being lower in price, as intended to allow you to still be effective for your team even when you're not having your best game. And this isn't just isolated to tanks. I'm sure you've encountered a few tanky Reapers and Soldier 76s out there. Another dev adds on, to add to Connor's post, we do track where players are earning currency generally from various sources and are keeping track of the rate of currency gain across various heroes and roles. A recent patch as well scaled back Cassidy, for example, on this very point. The devs get asked about active items, which are key in MOBA games like Dota. An active item is one that gives you a brand new ability. In Dota, any hero can gain the teleport ability, which is a huge game changer to a lot of playstyles, and there's many of them. Spell immunity is another one that's very common. The devs say, regarding active items as a MOBA player, I love this idea. One of the unique challenges for us compared to most MOBAs, though, is that we're on console and controllers have a limited number of keybinds available. That is one of the reasons we tend to prefer adding additional effects to existing abilities. For example, instead of an unstoppable active item, we have Reinhardt's Crusader's Cure, which cleanses while charging. In general, though, upgrades that give you more active counterplay is definitely an interest of ours. They get asked, will heroes who are already released ever get new unique items? We will continue to iterate on existing heroes based on the developing meta and data, depending on the issue we want to solve. Example, is a build unviable or has gameplay issues? It's totally possible that the best solution is to add or rework existing hero items or powers. They get asked two questions here. Brawl seems to be the clear and obvious best way to play the game. Do you think there's ways to evolve the game past just ramming your head at the other team? Or is it a function of how the current roster, Reaper, Rhine, etc.? Also, is there plans to toggle first person and third person? The devs say, great questions. I think it largely comes down to which heroes you and your teammates pick. Brawl can absolutely be a viable playstyle, but it tends to leave you vulnerable to counterplay from heroes that have strong flank game. Ashe is a great example here. If you're going up against a Rhine that is building into shield health, you're going to have a really bad time staying in the backline and pouring ammo into a shield that will basically never break. Instead, taking an angle to try to pressure their supports can be a great way to either get picks or at least force their Rhine to fall back to help. I know, we can all dream. As for first person, third person toggle, this is not something we're currently planning on doing, But that doesn't mean it's entirely out of the question. We're always looking for feedback from the community on what they want to see next, and there's nothing stopping us from revisiting a feature if it garners enough interest. Next question. When designing heroes for the mode, do you generally prefer transformative powers that change hero fantasy or abilities that double down on existing hero strengths? This is a really fantastic question. Thank you for asking. While we do like to keep within each hero's respective hero fantasy and design, we also don't want to limit ourselves in any way. Overall, it's dependent on each hero and their lore background. For example, our beloved Flying Rhine feels like something he'd absolutely do. Maybe he bugged Brigitte to enhance his suit or something. But his character personality is exuberant, over the top, whereas Reaper, who also has flying abilities, seems much more covert due to his Wraith form, and that ideology applies to other heroes too. Ana, for example, would look pretty horribly out of place soaring through the air, though as an Ana main, that would be pretty sick. Are you looking at ways of dealing with some stats not being useful on some heroes rather than others? An extreme example is being extra ammo on characters like Rhine. The devs say we are not looking to make stats like max ammo work with characters like Reinhardt currently. This is definitely a rough edge on the mode, but part of it is intentional. Having different items shine on heroes helps create item build variety from hero to hero. A weapon power focused on Soldier 76 would build very differently from a weapon power focused Reinhardt because max ammo is not needed or useful. We decided not to hide those items because we want the general items to appear in the same location in the armory, no matter which character you're playing. That way you're able to learn the layout and become more agile in the armory as you play more. All that said though, one thing we would like to do in the future is to better highlight when a certain stat doesn't provide any benefit to your character. We also are looking into ways to better explain how stats like weapon and ability power affect each hero. Something I noticed, for example, is there is a lifesteal on melee common item, which only applies to quick melee, but there's an epic item that gives you an added effect on melee damage, and it does emphasize that it works with Reinhardt's hammer. So little tool tips like that in the armory I think are very helpful to me to understand what goes with what. Talk about the design of Stadium over time, and we always knew they were doing their crawl, walk, run with this, with Junkstein's lab being an early variation. And he says the earlier versions of Stadium was closer to that, where it's more random in nature. So Stadium, I think at surface can look wacky, but I think what he's trying to say here is it actually is pretty competitive. Like wacky things happen, but just like a wacky MOBA game. It's not actually an April Fool's patch. It's more like a competitive MOBA game with some April Fool's elements in the shop. All in all, that's everything for the developer AMA. What do you guys think of Stadium? I think it's a template to extend the game's life by a decade. Lots they can do with it. I'm super optimistic, and I think it really allows for each pillar of the game to focus on its strengths rather than trying to appease everybody. We never got the PvE mode that they had been hyping up for so long, but a lot of the philosophy of that is well implemented into Stadium. And especially with other competitor games casting a wider net into the general gaming player base, hero shooters as a concept haven't been more mainstream ever. And while Rivals is beloved for its strengths, Stadium clearly seems to be a very powerful strength for the short and long term for Overwatch's life. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to click subscribe and the bell icon so you get notified when my new videos come out. I've been Frito. I'll see you guys next time.